Hey, Dave Melenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope you guys are doing awesome. Uh, today, I promise you, you're going to have to put on your seatbelt. And so I'm going to tell you this right up front. Whenever somebody on their LinkedIn profile says, and I quote, I am extremely passionate about digital marketing. I talk fast and I think fast. So just be prepared. For Eric Clark, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'll try to slow my rate of speech down a little
Nah,
bit.
don't worry about it. Be yourself. That's what's so cool about it. You have so much going on in your brain. The times that we're able to, share together some virtual time or in person on a roundtable, whatever. I just thoroughly enjoy all the wisdom that you have. So wanted you to share it with our listeners today. And I have to start with pronouncing the company name right. It's SWICKTEK. So why don't you go ahead and explain how that works and what SWICKTEK is, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. Traditionally, SWICKTEK. So I say Swick Technologies and then shorten it back up to SWICKTEK, and I spell it out SWICK. It's co-owned by Gary Swick and Isaac Montegudo, and Swick seemed easier than Montegudo Tech.
Yeah, I was going to say, where's that guy's name? How does that work?
And so they joined forces. They each had their own entities. Back in the early 2000s, they came together in 2004 and formed what was then called IM for Small Business, which is a real mouthful, which became IM4B. And then we, did some branding and arrived at Swick Technologies. And then we started, just shortening it amongst ourselves, and that stuck just kind of internally and externally. So I've been with SWICKTEK for 3 years. I started as an account manager. I found a home for myself in our marketing department and then navigated to our sales. So I still help with marketing and I still help with account management, and I am our one external outside sales rep. So we are a managed service provider. We've really transitioned to more of a MSSP, which is a managed security solution provider. We really have a lot of security and cybersecurity baked into our DNA. But traditionally, I guess, in the short side of it, we're a technology consultant and solution provider. Think of it as IT as a service. So we can be, in terms of EOS and traction, we would be accountable for IT. And we are for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. And then when we kind of graduate up market, we're more of a complement to that internal IT department or team and some of those folks on projects and executing some of the architecture of those things. So that's a little bit about SWICKTEK in a nutshell, I suppose. And I could go on for a very, very long time.
Well, I was captured when I checked out the first time we got connected, which has been a year or so now. On LinkedIn, I was drawn to the fact that it says Client Success Associate. And I think whenever we're able to put client in our title, and that's like the first word, I think there's some real value there. So, that's some of the stuff that I want to jump into today. Outside of SWICKTEK, though, you also have, which just floored me again, with all the other stuff that you have going on in addition to raising a family. So is there anything that you want to share what's going on outside of SWICKTEK before we jump into more stuff about you?
Yeah, I suppose it's a gift and a curse to have so many ideas. And for me, it's hard to know when. I've gotten better at not letting every idea turn into a thing. But before I was able to really kind of harness that gift, I launched the Where to Hunt podcast, which is a podcast that's based around whitetail hunting throughout the Midwest. And that turned into a national radio show that takes live calls every single week on Tuesday nights. And that's the studio that we're in right now.
Okay. Awesome.
That also is a GPS-based app for whitetail hunters and all sorts of hunters to help identify occupied and unoccupied hunting land.
Wow.
That got put under an umbrella of a media company. So I also do logo design on the side. I have a degree in graphic design and web media. So I really have aimed my outdoor or my branding and logo design at the outdoor industry more.
Okay.
So. But, Where to Hunt as a stand is becoming a media company by and large. So
where'd you get that idea?
Which one?
Yeah, exactly. Which of those five? No, the Where to Hunt app. I mean, that just seems brilliant. The way you kind of laid it out for me. So I just was curious how that evolved. And we get a lot of people, and the reason that I asked this, Eric, is we get people on the show, and we get people that are listening that have these ideas, and they think in their mind, like, and maybe I used to think this too, is you either have to do a Shark Tank type thing where it's got to be, $100 million deal, or I'm not going to do it. Right. And there's plenty of people that do these, kind of integrated into their life, and it slowly morphs into something. So, walk us through when you came up with the idea, and then all of a sudden it kind of turned into, wow, maybe somebody would want to buy it, could use it. I could potentially have a customer out of it. I just love that walk that you created for yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had the idea just selfishly as a hunter. I spent a lot of time in spring scouting. This is before a wife and kids and a house. I had an apartment, and this is like right on the cusp of going back to school full time at 25.
Sure.
I would spend time scouting. I would get out, and then in the hunting season after spring had passed, and I would get to some desolate area that I perceived to be off the grid, so to speak. And it never failed that, I would either get bumped by someone, right? Or I would do the bumping.
Sure.
And, I just thought there was a better way. So I looked in the market. I looked on the app store. I looked online. I did a lot of Google searches. Back then I was selling SEO like hotcakes. So
Okay.
I really kind of knew how to look for some things, and there wasn't really anything there. So I, sent some emails out to some companies after doing searches for app development, and I got bids for upwards of $150,000,
Oh, nice.
and
For a
and a
college kid,
couple.
that's it. I was right in your ballpark, right?
Yeah, I was like, I'm a full-time college kid. Are you kidding me? Um, but I was a project manager, and I was at the time 100% commission. And
Okay.
so for me, it was really just part of my mindset to not give up and push through things and get it done.
Sure.
So I just kept digging and digging and digging, and I eventually found a guy in Chicago that could do it for 10,000. But then through conversation, because I'm a loudmouth, I learned of a site back then called Elance, which has now been acquired or merged with Upwork.
Okay.
And so I put a bid out, and I got 40 replies back, and I hired a company that has roots in California but is based out of India.
Hmm.
And I had an MVP put together, a minimum viable product for under 5,000. Got it built, and I had about 10,000 followers on Facebook at the time for the page.
Okay.
And I thought automatically, like, I'll get 10,000 downloads, and then
Yeah.
that would be a hit.
Sure.
I
Yep.
had no idea how to monetize it. I didn't know anything about revenue models. I didn't know anything about venture capital or angel investors
Okay.
or startups. I didn't know anything about that world. I just had an idea. I didn't want to be a guy that just had an idea, so I built it. And it's just continued to evolve since then. And as I've learned more about business and kind of grown into my own, it's really changed. I just went through an incubator in January through March, and got kind of plugged into the startup ecosystem here in Milwaukee. And we're building some really exciting stuff now. I have a CTO, and I know what revenue models are. I have some revenue models. I have monetization on this thing, and it's generating some revenue. So it's changed quite a bit since the inception, but that was the initial concept. And
Sure.
that's kind of how I got
Wow.
through it.
So you obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, it sounds like you enjoy learning the stuff as you go. Is that correct?
I do. I like to build. I like
Okay.
to flex that side of my mind. So
Okay.
like that's why I love logo design, because it's always at the beginning of something, and it's always creative, and it's always helping.
Okay.
So and each chance I get to help name and brand and design and conceptualize,
Okay.
I could do that forever and never get tired of it, because it's always new and exciting. As things evolve with the app, it's now I'm reading books called Venture Deals, and it's super dry, and but it's continuous learning in new areas, and it's pushing
Sure.
me to do things I've never done before. One thing leads to another. Like now I have, through that, it led to another brand called the Okayest Hunter, which is an apparel line that's launching on June 1st.
Wow.
And that's an e-commerce based store, and there's a ton of
Okay.
traction there and a brand built. And it's just, like I said, it's a matter of turning these things off.
Sure.
Yeah, it's neat. It all kind of ties together, you know?
Yeah, so I'm curious because I'm kind of opposite of you, and I'm sure some of the people listening are opposite, where we have this idea. This is exactly why I will never in my life that I know of be able to play an instrument, because I want to pick the thing up and I want to be able to, pound out the Neil Peart drum solo, or I want to create the best, guitar solo that's ever been. And if I can't do it like instantly, then I can't get there. I don't have the patience for that. How do you, I mean, you're built probably obviously different, but for people that are listening that are built more like me, that it's like, oh my gosh, I have this idea, but I don't see what it looks like in conclusion. And I really don't have the passion to do all this legwork, but do I partner with somebody? I mean, and you start talking about these incubators. Are there places out there that you've run into that kind of help people develop those ideas as they're coming alongside them?
I would say the incubator's been a great place for
And so
that.
what does that mean for people that, because I've heard of it, but I would probably totally not even be close to accurate on what it is. So what exactly is that?
Sure, there's incubators and there's accelerators. One of the first to market accelerators that existed launched, I think it was early 2000, 2006, was Y Combinator, and that was out of Silicon Valley in California. An accelerator is really meant to be a program that gives you all of these resources. That's legal, that's accounting, that's development, graphic design, and mentorship, et
Oh,
cetera,
nice. Okay.
in exchange for equity, traditionally or typically. And then when you
Okay.
come out of that, you get your graduation day, so to speak, is pitch day. And
Okay.
so they've helped you build a pitch deck. They've helped you refine your go-to-market strategy. And so at the end of that, you're pitching that to VC, venture capital investors, and angel investors in hopes that you're going to get some sort of capital raise. And then you can kind of go to the races from there. Incubators are a little bit different, similar, but they're maybe a little bit longer. They're really focused on the mentorship, and there's a couple of them here in Milwaukee that focus on different verticals or markets. So like the Water Council is one that focuses on a lot of like water tech and things like that. But then there's
Okay.
Generator and G Beta. G Beta is an incubator that then they're trying to graduate you into Generator, which is an accelerator. Um, you know, the latter really does require some equity that you give up, but
Okay.
the table stakes are if you complete it, you might have an option to walk away with $100,000.
Sure.
Um, the one that I went through is completely free, no equity exchange, and it's put on by the community. So it's called 4M, which stands for For Milwaukee. That was put on in partnership by the MKE Tech Hub and the Commons, and just a lot of good people in that ecosystem that really just want to see people succeed and they help. So that's helped me gain access to more people that have a shared interest.
Okay. Wow, that seems like, so that you surround yourself with people that either have done it before, know how to do it. I mean, there's obviously some connection there, and that's got to be really comforting to come have somebody come alongside you that's done it before. Because I mean, I started two businesses in my life that were successful, probably one or two others that weren't successful. And, we have these ideas, but it's like, a lot of people struggle with figuring out how to get across, the finish line. And that's kind of why the big reason I wrote my book, Growing on Purpose, was because I've run into so many people that grow by mistake. So I feel like that what you just laid out in that, Eric, is really a huge help for somebody that might have that idea in their brain, but they don't know how to get it either on paper, they don't know how to get it to market. I mean, they're really good at what they do, but they just struggle with those ancillary pieces. So um, on your end, what was your strength? It was coming up with the idea and the implementation. I mean, did you have strengths all the way through, or where did you
My
notice your strengths being?
most commonly, as most people would note, my strength and weakness are strongly correlated.
Okay.
Where I'm strong is also where I'm weak. So I'm very comfortable in public speaking and in sales. I'm very confident in that kind of role. Where I'm
Sure.
weak is organization and structure and things of that nature.
Okay.
Maybe like some salespeople might be. So for me, I was able to be tenacious and dedicated and not give up and just go, go, go and try to outwork myself and leverage my work ethic to keep powering through. That weakness on that, the double-edged sword there is, there's burnout on that.
Sure.
So you could really burn out if you don't have the help that you need and the people around you to help support what your vision might be. I think in the last year, the biggest help has been the people side. So I have, like I mentioned, a CTO. I have a podcast co-host that I brought on. I have another friend that I went half on a different business, and he's more on the accounting and analytics and
Sure.
statistics
Yeah.
side. Again, in a place where I just won't go.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so it's for me, it's I follow Gary Vaynerchuk, and he is a guy that preaches a number of things, but one of the ones that I gravitate towards is doubling down on your strength and
Sure.
punting your weaknesses. There's a whole industry around self-help, and I refuse to put too much energy into things I know that I just can't turn the needle on. So by
Sure.
doubling down on where I think I'm stronger has
Yeah.
been, I don't know, a testament to the last 2 years of my life. I think I've really turned the needle on everything by just focusing on what I think I'm good at and then getting help where I'm weak.
And that's so cool that you bring that up, Eric, because part of the show that we want to really uncover and unpack with people is the self-awareness piece that, we don't all have all the strengths. We weren't created to have every strength possible. That's not how we're built. So, it does take a certain person to be able to say, hey, I'm strong here and I'm weak here. I share that same situation. And it's kind of funny, in my first company, we had 22 people on my team, and we were, running $10 million in annual sales through our company. And I could go, as the owner, I could go in any room that I wanted except for the accounting room, because I would walk in there and I had no clue what I was doing. And they would look at the computer screen and everything on there was red, right? It was like, everything's red. And I'm like, and they're like, oh my gosh, we're not having a good month. And I'm like, you guys just click this button and everything turns to black. I mean, it's super easy. And so I realized early on that accounting, organization, those are not my strengths either. And so that's where I think once I was able to unpack that for myself, and be okay with that, what man wants to admit a weakness, right? I mean, it's just not, in our DNA a lot of times to be able to do that. So that's so cool that you're self-aware enough to, identify your strengths and weaknesses, and that allows you then to partner with the right people, because the old jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing comes up. There are plenty of entrepreneurs that I work with and talk to that want to do everything themselves,
Yeah.
and I try really hard to discourage that. Just because you can't be good at everything. And if you're trying to provide the best customer experience possible, and you're trying to do everything else throughout your day, it's just not possible. So did you know that early on for you in your career, that did you have that self-awareness about, doubling down on your strengths, so to speak?
To a degree, I was self-aware enough. I had a good idea of what my strengths were, but I think at that point when I was younger, I wasn't willing to. I tried to force some of those things into my into will, or into
Sure.
I try to manifest those things. Like
Yeah.
when I was in college, I was going for a business management major, and then I hit accounting, and I was a really good student. I was 25 when I'm back to school. I was working full time, so I wasn't like some of my cohorts next to me that showed up to class high
Yeah.
at 18 and just graduated high school. Like
And
I
late. Yeah.
was funding it out of my pocket. So like for
Yeah.
me, I was trying to get as much out as I could. And I never tried so hard at something and failed so miserably. I stayed up all night watching YouTube videos. I sought out like I got help from people I knew that were accountants, because I was already in the business community.
Yeah.
I got help from the
Wow.
professor. I was like, what? I don't know what else I can do. Like, I'm not that stupid. I just don't. This just doesn't click for me. It's not
Sure.
my thing. So I
Yeah.
pivoted, and then that was a pretty good moment for me to try and actually fail and learn from that, and discover, like, look, this is stuff that I probably could learn over
Sure.
time and get it, but like I'm just not going to excel nearly as fast here if I were to put my energy somewhere else. Uh, that was it.
Wow. And that's so funny. My son and I use him on this show a lot. My son actually has a calculus major, and like he can totally get into, and proves to me how 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my eyes glaze over. I totally lose interest. I'm daydreaming. I'm doing everything possible to try and pay attention, but it just isn't there.
Yep.
So, you know, the earlier in our career that we can just hone in on our strengths, I think the strength finders and disc, you know, are really solid ways for us to improve that self-awareness and do that. So I appreciate you sharing that information. You know, switching gears a little bit to SWICKTEK, you know, what is it for you that you tend to really, what are you passionate about in that particular company and in that IT field? What is it for you that really, you know, is your passion on a day-to-day basis?
I guess the problem solving for me, like it, people don't, you don't know what something can do if you never have been exposed to it before. Like you don't know what you don't know, right? I think that's a saying that most of us are aware of. And there's a number of businesses and leaders that I talk to on a regular basis that like technology has been commoditized so much so that even for me being 3 years into it, like there is a sort of dryness to it that it's like I flip a light switch and it should work, right? But what goes into that light switch turning on in your house? It came
Yeah,
from a power plant, and how did it get there? Through power lines, and how did that get engineered? Like, it's not that far, but it's getting to the point where like we just expect this stuff to work,
sure,
but the engineering that goes into certain scenarios of what you want to do, if you want to spin up a remote office because you acquired a new company, well, that company might be using a whole other technology stack. And now not only do you have to deal with the cultural side of it, but you don't want to get hung up on the technology side of it where you can't literally speak to the people at the company you just acquired.
sure.
So there's ways that we can engineer that, one of our clients that we worked with for, probably 5 to 6 years before we made the switches for them. And switches are a technical term. That's not what I mean. uh, we were able to take what took them 9 months, in some cases, to when they would acquire another company. That was their growth strategy. They would, do mergers and acquisitions, and they've grown substantially as a result of that. When we started working with them, they had like 7 locations. Now they have close to 30
Nice.
across the country. And we've been able to accelerate that growth by systematizing an approach to how they deploy physical equipment like routers and switches and firewalls, et cetera, and what's called remote desktop server to all come back to the mothership. So instead of eating that other company's IT and taking 6 months to have one technology expert talk to the other one, we've taken those people out of that equation, put in some hardware that has a baseline configuration. And now what took 9 months takes a weekend. It takes 2 to 3 days for
Wow.
that new company to spin up as the new
Sure,
entity. And that's where technology for me gets a little bit more exciting when I get into those conversations with the C suite and we talk about the capabilities that they can achieve based on their posture and maturity. That's different than talking about, the switching and the routing and the firewall and the beep bop boop stuff that the engineers are really, really
sure,
good at, where they're going to go into that detail because they have that discipline. For me, I want to talk about the capabilities that they didn't even realize they could consider if I know that their growth strategy, for example, might be M&A. If it's not, if it's I need to transition to e-commerce, well, there's all this fun, fancy, colorful stuff around getting a new e-commerce website and
sure,
launching that. But
sure,
what's the back end? How does that tie into your inventory and your supply chain? And what can we do with EDI, electronic data interchange? And how do we connect all those things so that way you can have real-time inventory or barcode scanning and that it works because the Wi-Fi is set up?
sure.
These are the conversations that get me more excited about technology. And those are the things that are hard to unpack when I have my elevator pitch about SWICKTEK being a managed service provider,
Yeah.
because we're so much more, right?
Well,
Um,
and that's where, so you said you enjoy the problem solving piece. So for a novice like me that knows, I don't even know what IT stands for. So, you know, nor do I want to, so don't tell me. It's, I look at it, I'm in the sales world. That's where I lived. That's where I grew up. That's, you know, my passion is, you know, being involved there. So how do you take your problem solving skills and bring it over into the sales realm? Because that's really, you know, at the end of the day, that's in my mind when I see client success associate, you know, we're front line with the client, right?
mhm.
And so from a selling perspective, my question is you have this problem solving brain. How do you convert that then into selling, and keep that, you know, emotion there, you know, keep it, you know, exciting for a potential prospect?
Yeah, once my passion gets uncaged in any conversation, it's pretty easy to get people to kind of follow along with what I'm saying. And for me, the first part of that equation is listening. I'm just here to listen. I
Yeah,
want to take some things in, and believe it or not, as much as I love to talk and hear myself talk, and I'm very self-aware that I have a bit of an ego with that. Um, it's fine. I am also a really good listener when I need to be, because
Sure,
there are certain things that I can pick up on and look at holistically that someone else might be, blinders on, zoomed in on a very acute problem. I'm able to, with the experience that I have and seeing what SWICKTEK has done for the past 15 years, start to see things that maybe companies have done in other industries or congruent or adjacent industries, and start to tease that out and then put that back into the conversation. A, to showcase I was listening, but not for the sheer fact to show that, but to show, look, there's a bigger picture here, and here's some other things we can do with this. Like, Eric, I don't want to use Teams. I have no value in using a chat platform. I don't really get that. We're not comfortable doing that. We're happy to get up and walk to the other person's desk to tell them a message.
sure.
But I looked on your office and I noticed you're using an antiquated phone system. And it's, what kind of problems do you have there? Well, we drop calls all the time. It's garbly, it's gooky, it gets static, it's expensive, no one supports it. We need to upgrade that. Well, that same chat platform that you might not be wanting to use, aka Microsoft Teams, as a voice solution, and economically, it's far more affordable, and you get so many more features out of it to enable a remote workforce. And so suddenly now we're shifting the conversation from something that was looked at as, well, that's not what I need, Eric. And I'm looking, well, you know what? Maybe you do, because it brings all these other things. And so really it's just knowing about the product offerings that we have, how we support those things, how we engineer them, and paying attention to what that person has going on in their environment.
So how do you, because this is really this is hard for me to figure this one out. So I really need your help, because the things that I sell in my life, I think about, disc assessments or coaching or leadership development. I mean, they're things that are easy to explain to most people. I mean, I try, because I if someone's going to sell me something, they got to be at like sixth grade level for me to really get it, right? If they start going up into upper level stuff, I get lost. Whether I'm unique or not, I don't know. But so how do you like take this, I want to say, like factual stuff that you're doing, and how do you turn it into like emotional things that somebody is going to try and buy? Or we always hear that you people buy emotionally. How do you bridge that gap? Because I'm feeling like there's this huge chasm between what you're selling and what me as I don't even know that all the stuff that you're saying. So and how do you like help me through that? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I want my listeners to really understand that we can, whatever we're selling, we need to find a way to explain it to people that they understand. And so
Sure.
how do you do that? I mean, I'm sure you've run into somebody, Eric, that's not at your intellectual, IT level, which whatever that means, right? I mean, if you're trying to sell me something, man, I got to tell you, I would be like fighting myself to stay focused on, because I don't know all those words. So how do you I don't want to say dumb it down, but how do you create the need, the passion? How do you turn that into an emotional discussion with them? Or maybe you don't.
Yeah, bringing down Barney style is an effective way to do it. I think to your point, how do you bring that passion in the conversation? How do you dumb it down? Um, I would say it, I try to explain it as a way that I would understand it, because I'm not actually that technologically smart. I don't have that intellect as one might think. I've gotten it all through osmosis. So for me, when I talk to our engineers, I'm asking the questions that I think a client would ask, because that's what I would ask, and I have to
Okay.
stop them and say, "Well, what
Sure.
are we really talking about here?" But I'm first of all, I'm not convincing anybody of anything. If I get into a conversation where I feel I have to convince someone, I'm done. I'm not going to waste my time
Sure.
convincing people. I
Sure.
can't convince myself to go for a run today because it's
Yeah.
raining outside. The fact that I think I could convince anyone else to do anything,
Right.
can't even change our own habits, let alone someone else's. So
Correct.
if I sense that early on in what we call ideal client profile, and we gauge that through a scale of 1 to 5 for various things, but from there, if I realize I'm not trying to convince someone, then it's just painting a picture of the future. And if I, for some reason, am sensing that they're not interested in some pie in the sky thing, and that we're jumping too many steps ahead, then I can usually find a way to tie it into, like, well, Are you in the financial industry? Do we need to worry about FINRA compliance or HIPAA compliance if you're in healthcare?
Sure.
Or most often it's manufacturers. And then we have to talk about things that manufacturers have to adhere to, like ITAR if they're doing work for the DoD or things of that nature.
Yeah.
Well, there's certain things from a technology standpoint I can do for less money than you can do it for, and it's going to be done correctly. So
Sure.
when you get audited next month or next quarter, you can just check some boxes.
Yeah.
What is that worth to you,
Sure.
right? And
Sure.
now we can take some baby steps in the direction that I'm trying to head to get you to a much stronger position from a technology standpoint. We're just trying to stabilize things. So
Gotcha.
it's one or two conversations. I think maybe 5 years ago it was a conversation about stabilizing a network, making sure it's reliable, making sure you're not having things that are on fire and having reactive problems. Uh, versus today's conversation really is how do we leverage it to either A, accelerate growth and increase ROI, or how do we optimize the back office and start to save money and cut costs in different areas? What can
Gotcha.
we put in someone's hands to make them more efficient? Those are hard things to measure, like employee efficiency. Um, but it's just having knowing what's in your toolbox and knowing when to pull out the tool for the job.
Sure.
Like you were in construction, so like you don't walk up to. I did radon systems. I did marketing for radon companies, so I had to learn how to install a radon system, and I knew based on the type of house or the roof what tools I could or couldn't use on that job and what I should be bringing. If I
Sure.
had to drill through brick, it was different than if I had to drill a core hole through wood.
Yeah.
If it was a asphalt shingle roof versus a cedar shake roof,
Sure.
I'm doing the
Sure.
job differently. So knowing who you're talking to is really important. Knowing what industry they're in and maybe what some of their competitors are doing and their challenges. I do a lot of research before I go into a conversation.
Okay.
And I'll stalk people. I'll dive
Sure.
into LinkedIn 10 layers deep and find them on Facebook and have a Twitter account. Like I'm fleshing out any common connections, asking people ahead of time, do you know so and so? What are some gotchas that I might run into?
Sure.
I'm pretty thorough in that side of things because I just like to be as prepared as I can and any assumptions I might have going into things. Sometimes I'm right or sometimes I'm wrong, but
Sure.
um,
So you hit on some really good one. I mean,
sorry,
so
a lot.
then it's funny because your 5 years ago discussion versus your today discussion. The today discussion got me with ROI, cost cutting, efficiency. I mean, those are words that entrepreneurs, business owners, are really going to start to understand. And then it's kind of like the light switch that you said. I mean, I have to say, prior to you bringing that up, and thanks for bringing it up, now my world will never be the same. I never thought twice about how did that electricity get from that power plant to here. That never in my world crossed my mind. So obviously it's amazing how different brains work differently. But in this case, you mentioned trying to convince somebody of something. I learned long ago in sales that if I try to convince you of something, and if I do convince you, the next person will be able to convince you of something else. However, if I allow that person to discover it on their own, they will own that then for the rest of their life. It's convince versus discover. So I love the fact that you're utilizing that, that concept of, I can't convince people, because I think in my sales training, that's one of the things that we really talk down on, is trying to convince somebody, because there's no real end positive. I mean, if
Even if
I'm
you close it, it's still bad, I think. And
right.
fine, go be aggressive and do it. Like I was in like I said earlier on, I was in 100% commission sales role once upon a time, and
Yeah.
the tenacity you had to bring to the table in that environment was pretty darn aggressive. If you don't kill, you don't eat.
Yep.
And I had moments when I didn't eat, and that didn't taste good. Um, like
Yep.
you talk about creativity in sales. The convincing thing is fine. Some people do it. That's okay. That's why I think there's a really strong marriage between marketing and sales. And that's why I like to be straddled in both worlds at SWICKTEK, because I can control to a degree, and not that I'm a control freak, but sales marketing, we talk all the time, and
Sure.
we use sales content to inform what we're going to put up from a marketing perspective. So I'll go out and I'll be on a prospect meeting, and I'll hear what I'm being told by a decision maker about how they found us, what their problems are, what they're experiencing, what their concerns are, what they don't care about.
Yeah.
I'll take that back to marketing. We'll have a conversation around brainstorming, and then we'll pump that content right back out at that same seat, so to speak, not specifically,
Right.
but we'll aim it right back at that demographic. And suddenly that demographic thinks we're talking to them. And now they believe that they found a solution. I didn't convince them of anything. And
Right.
so now when I have a conversation with them, not only have they seen my face on the internet, whether that's LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever, or a
Sure.
website, YouTube, um, I've kind of bridged that gap to building that trust and that relationship and front loaded it. So I just, that's the world where creativity is really fun. And then, when you have to get creative, when you need to eat, so to speak, no, the more creative thing I've done recently for SWICKTEK was um, going to job boards, MilwaukeeJobs.com, Monster Jobs, whatever the other ones are on Big Shoes Network, et cetera,
Sure.
looking for companies hiring for IT
Okay.
and cataloging and capturing all of those people and the HR people that make those hiring decisions, and then producing content that speaks to the HR person saying, hey, are you trying to hire for an IT manager? Have you ever considered a managed service provider? There's 3 things that you can do to help you hire for your IT manager, or
Sure.
here's some other things you can do to consider why it might be a good idea to consider us, right? And that performed really, really well. And then it put
Nice.
leads in my pocket that I could go have warm conversations with, where I wasn't convincing anybody of anything. Um, that's the creative part that I love. I love trying to figure out how I can put the conversation in my favor without
Sure.
having to do a cold call, because there's a place for cold calling in today's market, but
Yeah.
it's nothing like it used to be. So
Yeah. Yeah. Not, I remember I had a client, or I knew somebody that had to do I don't know if you were in that, but there was a guy in our Sales Advantage roundtable that had to do 200 cold calls a day. And like a good day for him was when he got 1 or 2 people to even pick the phone up. And I'm just like, man, that would
numbers
just
game
be so
anyways.
painful. But you clicked on something, and as we start to come in for a landing on this, I want to ask you about, knowing your audience. It's really a key comment that you made. And so I'm thinking out loud here that you're sitting in front of somebody, and there are certain people that are definitely going to want to understand the path from the power plant all the way to, the light switch, right?
Mhm.
And so there are those engineer type people that are very factual, and this really brings in the disc,
Yep.
personality profiling, because there are certain people that definitely want to understand that. And then there are people like me, and neither one's right or wrong, Eric, neither one's good or bad. It just, we're built different. There's somebody like me that, again, all I want to see is the switch. I want to flip the switch, and I want the lights to go on, or whatever SWICKTEK would do in the simplest form. I want to do this, and then this happens. How do you, as a sales professional, how do you find out, who that is, what your audience looks like, and how you're able to determine which person I'm selling to?
Sure. I think the place I started, so when I say I think where maybe you could start as someone listening, here's what I did. When I started at SWICKTEK and I got into a sales seat, I reverse engineered all of the existing sales we had closed before me. So where did our sales come? And for SWICKTEK, we have 2 types of sales primarily. We have agreement sales for ongoing recurring accounts that are paying us monthly for monitoring, maintenance, security, et cetera, backups, Office 365 licensing, whatever. And then we have project sales. And when I reverse engineered that, all project sales, meaning like we're going to do something called a lift and shift and migrate Exchange email on premise from a physical server box to in the cloud. That's an example of a project
Okay.
versus the, hey, I need you to monitor and maintenance and be my help desk support. That's recurring. All project sales came from technical context at companies, IT manager, director of IT, CIO,
Okay.
those type of people. All agreement type of sales came from C-suite decision makers.
Wow. There you go.
And once I figured that out, it was like,
Yeah.
well, I know who I'm good in front of.
Sure.
I'm good in front of C-suite. Now,
Sure.
anytime I try to talk to a technical person, that doesn't go well because they want to know
Yep.
they want to go on down every stop on the train tracks
Yep.
and investigate and get off the train and look around. And I have no ability to do that.
Yep.
That's where that self-awareness comes into play. It's not that it's a bad thing. I just don't have the patience to do it. I'm not wired for it. And that person is going to pick that up from me and they're not going to have a good experience. So for those ones, I just bring an engineer with and they do the talking.
That's awesome. Yep.
For the other ones, I don't bring an engineer with because that's going to deter that C-suite decision maker. If I brought an engineer to you in a sales meeting to talk about technology, you would glaze over.
Yeah,
You'd be
totally.
like, why the hell did that just happen to me?
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
even know what to do with that information.
Yep.
But if I
And
came
quite
at it
frankly, Eric, I
from
think I'd
conversations,
be irritated at you,
I've experienced that before,
right?
believe it or not. Yeah.
Right? Where I'm like, seriously, dude, you know, and maybe it's me because I'm more self-aware because that's what I do for a living. I train and teach them that. But I gotta believe there's people that just are so like you said, their eyes glaze over. I've watched, and when I've either secret shop salespeople or did ride-alongs with them, whatever I'm doing with them, if they're not so dialed into that buyer, that prospect, like constantly, even to the point where when they start looking away or they start checking anything, I know when this thing's coming for a landing, and it better come quick. You know, if you're at 30,000 feet and you see a runway, you better get down there quick because otherwise you're done.
Yep.
So, you know, that's
I don't know how you teach that. Like, I don't know how you teach not only self-awareness, that's really hard. I don't know that anyone's figured that out. But then the other piece is picking up on social cues and being, not even that you're like actively looking for them, but that you should just intuitively know what they are.
right.
You know, I know when someone's on a call, I know if they want to get off it right away because they just want their problem solved, or if they want to chit chat for a little
Yep.
bit.
Exactly.
And having the awareness about that and then the ability to react to it appropriately and accordingly, those are assumptions that I've made, you know, that when I go out on these sales calls, if it's a C-suite, I'm not bringing an engineer. um, and my assumption's good, and I've had success there. So
Yep.
my closing rate for Q1 was incredible. It was like 70%. uh,
Awesome.
you know, it's a different story with COVID, obviously, but my closing rate has only gone up since I got into the seat, and it took a little bit to reverse engineer and figure that stuff out.
Sure.
So it's
But
different for everybody.
yeah,
Everyone, like, our sales cycle is long at SWICKTEK because these
yeah,
are big dollars. These are big projects. There's a lot of trust involved in IT, letting someone into your information. Uh, there's a lot of trust building that has to happen before someone's going to pull a trigger. Um, Other industries are likely different, but knowing your audience is really important, and you can figure that kind of stuff out. If you just look at historical success, what's filled the marketing funnel, where did that come from, and what has closed from that, and then just
yeah.
work backwards from there.
Yeah, that reverse engineering thing is really key. I think that we probably don't invest enough time on thinking about how we got to where we are, you know, what successes we were able to achieve, you know, what path we took. We just are always looking forward, which again is a good entrepreneurial trait, is to always look forward. There are some things that we can learn from the back. And like you said, especially if you're new into a position, you know, to have that insight to know up front, if I'm talking to an IT guy, I might as well plan on bringing my engineer right away. If I'm communicating with the owner of the business who happens to wear the IT hat, whatever, you know, chances are, you know, you don't want to bucket people because people start thinking about profiling. And the reality, though, is that's pretty accurate. You know, the IT people tend to want to understand this and where the switches and where all these things are. And if we're not dialed into that as sales professionals, we'll miss that so quick.
In my experience, those people are trying to validate our technical chops. Do we have what it takes? They need to, like, if I'm going to interview a salesperson, I know what to look for. I know if they're full of crap or not. And an IT person wants to do the same. If they talk to me, they're going to think we're full of crap because I can only go so deep.
Yep,
You know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When you can't answer the first question, it's like really brutal, you know. It's like if you're selling a technical product and you can't answer whatever their first question is out of the gate, I think you're going to be in trouble. So,
Or tell me the IP address of blah. I'm like, I don't know. Why would I know that?
yeah. What's IP stand for again?
I don't even get
So,
information from
the two last things. So you were talking about networking. So what tips would you have for anyone listening? I love to pick people's brains about networking and about connecting dots. And, you know, there's so many ways we could go, but I just want to get your feedback. What's a couple of tips that you've seen that work well when you're discussing networking or when you're actually doing networking? What do you see really working well for you, Eric?
Sure. To not be confused with IT networking, because that's a whole different topic.
Yes,
I
yes.
know you're talking about the human
Thank you.
networking.
See, I had no clue. I never even crossed my mind.
The
Not
thing that
that
gets
kind of
into my
networking.
world on a
Networking for
day-to-day.
business development.
It's a long game. It's a long game. I can't wait. I can wait. Believe me, I can certainly wait. But it'll be very interesting what the compounded effect of networking will be over the course of the next 20 years. I joke, and I hope no one takes this the wrong way, but I'll be candid and be myself. When I go to the traditional networking events that happened before COVID, honestly, it's a bunch of rich old white dudes.
Yeah.
And my wife, like, what do you have going on today? I'm going to a rich old white dude conference. And and you know, and that's not to box anybody out. It is what it is. I'm
Yep.
just saying that, you know, these are people that have been doing business together for, you know, in some cases 30 plus years.
Yep. Yep.
And those are relationships that have forged over time and codified and are unbreakable. And so for some newbie to go in and think that there's going to be some overnight success of you shaking hands with someone, exchanging a business card and you getting business out of it, you're not wrong.
Right.
It might work and you might get lucky every now and again, but you need to be conscious and mindful that you need to actually give more than you take. And so I believe in the 51-49 rule that if I enter into some sort of conversation with someone, I'm immediately on the offense looking for ways that I can extend value to that person and give, because I believe in reciprocity. And
Awesome.
over time, if I give to someone and I have nothing that I expect in return, that person's going to feel compelled to return the favor in some sort of, maybe it's a referral, maybe they have business themselves. And if I can overextend an index on that and give them more and more and more, um, as that network builds, it becomes even more valuable because now I have ways to connect more people. I did a experiment slash I needed to stay socially connected. I'm an extrovert, so this time has been really challenging for me.
Sure.
So I did weekly coffee and chit chat meetings with folks. And I did that by putting something on LinkedIn saying that's what I would do. I send like a Calendly and I talk to people. I think I talked to close to 20 folks and I made like tons of connections for people
Yep.
because I'm aware of everyone in my network. I'm like, oh my God, this person can help you. You should talk to that
Sure.
person. And then after the calls, I would get on LinkedIn. I'm like doing all these messages, connecting people. I probably annoyed a lot of people, but
Yep.
the serendipity of that makes me intrinsically feel really good that I
Excellent.
connected. And now just sitting on the back burner is reciprocity, just stewing up real nicely.
Yep. Yep.
And over 20 years, if I'm playing a long game, which I am, the relationships that I'm forging and codifying by doing that are going to be, hopefully everyone says, oh my God, you need to talk to Eric. You need to talk to
Right.
Eric. You need to
Yep.
talk to Eric. And
That's
I'm
awesome.
starting to see that now, and I'm young and it's early.
Okay.
So I
That's so
hope that
cool.
that builds.
Awesome. Well, one last question for you. The runway is in sight. So what's one thing that most people don't know about you?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I've toyed with how to answer this question. And I, I think, you know, not to say it for any sort of like woe is me thing, but I did grow up homeless for a good chunk of time as a
Wow.
child.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it's neat to talk about because I don't care. It wasn't my fault, you know.
Yeah.
I was just along for the ride.
Sure.
And when you're in it, you don't know any different. So for me
Sure.
growing up, like there are some hard things about it, but some part of me thinks I've been running from that for a long time. That I want to make
Okay.
sure my kids don't have that in
Sure.
their, you know, upbringing.
Yeah.
Um, but it also helps to make sure that I've never taken anything and I continue to not take anything for granted at
Yeah.
all. And that you really can't overcome anything. Like nothing is permanent. You know, I don't think that that's the case. And I think you have the ability to, I'm a big cheesy guy with quotes, but one of my favorite quotes, a lot of them is, you can't change the direction of the wind, but you can adjust your sails. So even though a situation might be challenging, tough, hard, difficult,
Sure.
sad, whatever, you can shift your perspective and you can take something different out of that and go about it a different way. And, you know, I couldn't change the fact that I was homeless, but I could change my demeanor, you
Sure.
know, and,
Yep.
and then people look at you like, what's wrong with this guy? Is he crazy? Like what, you know? And so I enjoy that mentality. And so that's not something that most people know.
Wow.
I
Well,
don't know if they're
thanks for
touting that. I guess in this case, I kind of am because it's a public podcast. But it's just
no, thanks for sharing it. I mean,
who I
that's
am. So
just a
yeah,
cool, it's a cool place to come from where you're aware, again, it's self-awareness of what you did have, what you have, what you didn't have, and that stuff changes and moves and it can be gone, here today, gone tomorrow. So that's awesome. Well, Eric, what would be the best place for people to get a hold of you? You added a ton of value, whether we're talking about hunting, whether we're talking about start trying to jump into an incubator versus an accelerator. I mean, man, we just covered a gamut of stuff. And so if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for that to happen?
sure. If you have an IT question, need, concern, or you just want to talk about some stuff there and see what, you know, might be on the horizon, I would recommend you go to SWICKTEK.com and start the conversation there. That'll, if you fill out a forum post, it'll come to me. Or you go to LinkedIn. I'm active there daily, and you can take a look at some of the different ventures I have, whether that be the media company, Base Layer Media, the hunting company, Where to Hunt, or SWICKTEK. So I would say that would be it.
Awesome. And it's ERIC. I made that mistake of making sure I was like, I wrote down K and I'm like, why can't I find him on LinkedIn? So,
Yep.
it's one of those things you don't think about until you need it. So, well, Eric, man, this was awesome. I learned a ton, like I always do. And it's like, thank you for not going over my head with all the technological jargon that you could have did. You kept it real for us. So I appreciate it. And again, I always value your insight in our Sales Advantage Roundtable. So thanks again for hanging out with us. And we will close by encouraging people to jump on Eric's LinkedIn, like him, do whatever he wants you to do. But remember, he talks fast. Okay, so just strap in and get her going, and you will learn a ton from the guy. So again, thanks, Eric, for hanging out with us, and I appreciate all your efforts and everything, all the help you're giving other people, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thanks.